Hello, everyone. It's Jennie and Laurie of AstroPath, Jennie of hiddenpathastrology.com, and myself of astrolore.org. You can find us in all the social media places and like us and share and et cetera, et cetera. Today, we are here to talk about the Gemini new moon, which is happening shortly after midnight. Really, it's at 12:37 a.m. on June 18th. And that is at, I think, 27 degrees of Gemini, I believe. It's just a few days before the sun moves into Cancer.
Yeah, it's very almost, it's like very, very, very last degrees of 26. So close enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what we're here to talk about today. So first, before we dive into all of that, Jennie's going to talk a little bit about how the cycle itself works.
Yeah, so we are in a new moon. Laurie and I think have talked about this many times. The new moon is a little bit like the seed that you plant in the soil, where you plant it in the soil and you can't see it right away. And that's exactly what you see in the sky, where you can't see the moon at all because it's right next to the sun. And it travels with the sun. So you just don't get to see it until it pokes out a couple days later as a tiny little sliver. So that's the beginning of this whole cycle. And then 2 weeks later, you have a full moon, which we also make a video for. And then 2 weeks after that, the cycle resumes. So it's pretty close to a 4-week cycle to some variation. But the really, I don't know, really interesting thing about these latest new moons is that they're happening at the very end of the zodiac seasons. So I keep thinking of this kind of like you get to plant the seed for the prior zodiac sign. So we're planting a Gemini seed, which is totally concerned with the intellect and thoughts and learning and all these types of topics. But we're very quickly going to move into Cancer season. So it's kind of like being able to carry this, I don't know, this thought process or this idea with you into the next season. And I think that that's something that's pretty cool and unique about just how they're unfolding right now.
Yeah,
So,
it is interesting. The whole cycle of the whole lunar cycle is just so fascinating because it's really the cycle of everything in life. It's you start something, it grows through the course of time, it illuminates the fullness of the cycle, and then it breaks down. It's the cycle of everything. Birth, life, illumination, death. The whole cycle, it goes around and around and around. So here we are at this beginning point of the cycle. And yeah, it is interesting having it happen right before the next sign shows up, the next sun sign shows up. So this being the Gemini new moon, I think we should talk a little bit about what Gemini is really about.
Right. Yeah. Gemini is such an intellectual sign. I always think of it as an air sign. So to me, that right away makes me think about, the things that are going on in your mind, the things that you say that are based on the things that are going on in your mind. So it really refers to communication, and also just how do we get those thoughts in our mind? Well, we have to learn. So it's learning, thinking, and talking, that really comes about with Gemini. It's very fast, it's mutable, so it's super quick, it's pretty unstable, but it's also very flexible, so it can change its mindset pretty easily, which is probably one of the best things about it. I know our favorite keyword for Gemini is curiosity. And I've been listening to a lot of podcasts actually about curiosity lately and just coming to understand what an important driver it is for our behavior. It's the thing that can really interrupt negative thinking. Like it can just, you pause and suddenly you're curious about this like insect that you see on a tree or something like that. And it really just brings you right into the present moment. So that's what I like about it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I love the whole idea of curiosity as well. It is such an important thing. And I think it's Elizabeth Gilbert that talks about, and I've talked about this on our recordings before, but the whole idea that not everyone knows the direction of their lives, this whole idea of follow your bliss, follow your purpose, whatever. People, really what you want to follow, unless you have a really clear idea of where you're going, what you want to follow is your curiosity, because your curiosity will always bring you into new realms. And I think that is the whole mutability of Gemini. Curiosity changes things. No
Mm.
matter how stuck your mind might be someplace, if you can just open that door of curiosity, it's going to bring you into a whole new place, a whole new understanding. And yeah, it's so interesting because this particular new moon is happening so close to Cancer. It's like taking that curiosity and bringing it into the new season, which is the solstice. It's really bringing us from mutable into cardinal, which is so much more dynamic and active. And yeah, it's just, I think it's really important to think about the curiosity of Gemini and the gathering of information. In
Mm.
Gemini, we don't, you know, it's so different than Virgo, which is also ruled by Mercury. Both Gemini and Virgo are ruled by Mercury. But in Virgo, there's so much discrimination about what's right and wrong. And in Gemini, it's just, we're curious. We're going to gather all the information and then figure out what to do with it later. So it's a fascinating thing to think about that, and that it happens right at the end of the spring season when there's so much profusion of different flowers, and
Mm.
everything's in a hurry. And I,
Yeah.
living here on the coast in vacation land, watching through Gemini season as all the activity of preparing for summer. Everywhere you go, everybody is in preparation mode for all the tourists showing up. And you can feel that energy of Gemini. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Oh, I love how you describe that. Because you just really conjure the image of like all the busy things that start happening as the seaside opens up, and also that image of all these flowers and these bees buzzing around and collecting the pollen and butterflies, and they're all out doing their thing and gathering. And it also, as you were explaining that, also just was reminding me too, the gathering involves taking in what other people have to say, taking it, listening, hearing, and incorporating what other people have to say, and then you go on and you share that information with someone else. So there's the duality of Gemini, I think, has to do with that. Yes, you're talking, but you also have to listen so that you can gather the information and then pass it on. So I really like how you brought that in,
Yeah.
a really nice visual image of what
It's
it really
pretty
represents. So
interesting. So, okay, are we ready to dive into the chart?
yeah, let's look at the chart.
Okay,
Let's
let's
talk about the
open.
particulars of what this Gemini season really brings.
Yeah. It's an
Um,
interesting one for sure.
I know, right? So first of all, you can see the sun and the moon together there in Gemini, 26 degrees of Gemini. And right away, the most direct aspect we have to this is a square to Neptune. It's almost exact, just a degree away, not even a degree from Neptune. So right away, this just brings in a whole different flavor. We've been talking about sort of mental, and communication and clarity and those sorts of things. But you throw a Neptune square in there, and it takes away the clarity. It takes away the very crystal clear, discerning edges of, this sort of thought process. And it makes it completely fuzzy and puts it in this totally different place. And it brings in a much more imaginative and, I don't know, fluffy viewpoint, right? I mean, it's interesting.
It really is, because
Mm.
it really does. It takes away the clarity. It brings in, you've got to, in order to really, in a square aspect itself is kind of a demand for action or a demand to do something.
Mm.
It's not, yeah. There's these two energies are kind of at cross purposes, and you have to balance the two. So with Neptune, it's bringing in a dreaminess, a need to use imagination or spiritual understanding, or something in the way of, yeah, a dream. It's a
Mm.
dreaminess.
One thing I really like about this that I think is really interesting is that Neptune is states of consciousness. So, and it's all the states of consciousness. So everything from just total bewilderment, confusion, or delusion, just being totally befuddled by whatever's going around you, all the way up through these different, like going up a ladder. And I would say the top rung is just that, essentially, is the enlightenment, the spiritual enlightenment of everything is one. And, these very kind of, far lofty cosmic perspectives, and everything in between. So we're talking about confusion. We're talking about sort of delight when you see something that lets you transcend, like a piece of art that you're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And it just takes you out of your normal sort of intellectual space. So that's what Neptune's doing. And it's exerting pressure on that, that normal Gemini. Let's be really clear and quick, it's really forcing that to open and expand into a whole new viewpoint, really. That's what I'm taking.
I love that you brought up that whole idea of the ladder up to, high levels of consciousness, spiritual understanding, the lowest levels being, drugs, alcohol, delusion, all of that. So, with this square, as you're planting your seed, you want to really understand where you're at along that along that ladder.
Yeah.
So you might want to bring in poetry or music or meditation, or be careful if you drink too much wine. You want to really try to reside on the higher levels of that ladder. And if you can't get up to the top levels, listen to beautiful music and read poetry.
Yeah. And, and also I always think of the other component to this is there's a sense of, with Pisces and Neptune, there's this need for forgiveness of yourself. And so if you're finding yourself sort of being harsh, it's a great time to step that back and be like, whoa, like, I don't need to be that harsh. I just need to accept that I feel confused, or accept that maybe I haven't handled something in the best way. Because really, what I think is cool is that Neptune's consciousness and Gemini represent your mindset. So you really, once you get over the fact that you don't feel clear, which is the square, you can really just open to, oh, my mindset needs to expand. I need to bring more consciousness to my mindset. And that's going to help you just kind of open up to something new and different. And there's a very visionary piece to this, which I think we're going to talk about in the individual aspects, just this sort of idea that you can come up with the vision now. And not only that, because of Gemini, you can even write out like the details of your vision, and it doesn't matter if they're not perfect or isn't what actually unfolds perfectly with the vision. That doesn't matter. It's more that you have this wonderful opportunity to plant this seed, this vision that you want to see unfold in your life. And it's a unique moment in time.
Yeah.
So
it's a time to, really, as you're gathering that information and as you're being curious in whatever area of life this falls in for you, just allow yourself to be really soft inside and allow yourself to daydream. I look at this, as I'm looking at this right now, I just am thinking, just lay down in the ground and allow yourself to daydream.
Yeah. I really like it.
Yeah.
But other things, I mean, I guess the other thing, just a couple other aspect notes, is just, Mercury is the ruling planet of Gemini, as we've mentioned, and it is also in Gemini, and it has a square itself to Saturn. So really all that does is kind of underscore the connection between these two energies, and to look at the common ground of both, which is that they're both mutable and changeable, and this daydreaming idea is great. And then also you can look at the contrast, which is the sort of thoughts versus emotions. There's a little bit of a contrast between those two things, and you have an opportunity to work with both. And I think Saturn adds a bit more gravitas to the whole thing, that even though you're daydreaming and hanging out and then you're doing the soft skills, this has an impact, because with Saturn being in there, it creates a more solidity or a potential for solidity that normally wouldn't be there. So it's cool.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say around that is, because Mercury rules this Gemini new moon, this is really important. The fact that Saturn is and Mercury are in a square aspect to each other. And I'd really encourage you, if you haven't listened to the video that we made about Saturn moving into Pisces, that really there's a lot in that conversation that is reflected here, really, because what we talked about there was Saturn really moving into Pisces to create a structure around a dream. And that's a lot. This is sort of a reflection of that. Now we're planting a seed as we move into Cancer season. We're kind of taking that dream and planting a seed of curiosity, to bring curiosity to what that all is.
Yeah. And I think the big key to all that, the step one is just don't expect clarity. Don't expect crystal clarity. Embrace the softness of it. Embrace the fuzzy edges. Just be okay with the idea that you can't quite see it, and that's okay.
Right.
You can't, you're not going to have clear edges. It's going to be sort of out of focus. I keep thinking it's like I'm wearing glasses more and more now, and it's like taking off your glasses and things are fuzzy, and just kind of going, okay, that's okay. They're fuzzy right now. Yeah.
That could bring me down a whole rabbit hole around vision, but we'll resist that. But yeah, absolutely. Right. I think it's really important that we allow ourselves to be in a little bit of a dreamy state and not have super high expectations of exactly what this seed is. Plant a seed, get curious about what it is and how it's going to grow over the course of time. Right. Simple as that. Okay. Now I think what we can do now is
talk about the individual impacts on
get
how to
this. Whoa.
Woo.
Let me get this how it's supposed to be. And then we're going to move on and we're going to go to those of you who have Aries rising. Where is the seed being planted? If you've got Aries rising, you are going to be really digging into your own story, your own planting a seed in the area of communication. This could involve neighbors or siblings or just day-to-day where you live your life, environment. But being curious about that area of your life and what you are planting there. How does that connect, Jennie, with the Neptune in the 12th house?
Who knows? There's no clarity. I think what the Neptune in the 12th house, I mean, for Aries rising, I mean, this really just brings in, what it does is essentially connects this kind of, I don't know, maybe slightly mundane, like day-to-day business, your neighbors, even your siblings, how you talk. And suddenly it brings it into the spiritual practice place where suddenly the way you talk and the way you move through your environment is imbued with a new level of importance, or a new level of consciousness, I would say. So suddenly, I mean, this makes me think of walking meditation, like that whole idea of just walking, putting each foot down and being present with each step. I mean, that ultimately is what it brings up for me with Neptune in that 12th house, like really just the 12th house so much has to do with what's hidden, and also your view of spirituality, like how you grapple with spirituality.
Yeah. So the challenge to the seed you're planting in your communication is, you've got to really think about your own level of awareness in that 12th house. How well do you know those deep inner levels of yourself, and how are they supporting or challenging communication for you?
Yeah, that is definitely the question.
Yeah.
And then let that, whatever your answer is that question, let that play into your vision at this new moon.
Yeah. So I was going to say get clear, but you're not going to be clear. Just be curious. Don't worry about clarity. Be curious. Plant a seed of curiosity around how your spiritual understanding or confusion is impacting your communications.
Nice.
All right. So then we've got Taurus rising.
So if you have Taurus rising, this new moon in Gemini is happening in your second house. So let's talk about the second house for a minute. This is your place of self-worth at its core. It has to do with your energy reserves. It has to do with your financial resources. and any other tangible type resources. So that's what we're looking at. So you're planting a seed that has to do with how you communicate about your self-worth, or how you think about yourself. What is your narrative about your value in the world? So that's ultimately what you're doing. There's some pressure coming your way from Neptune in the 11th house. And Laurie, what is the 11th house all about?
The 11th house is where we receive from community. You can think of the 11th house as the community that supports you, really.
Nice. Yeah, it's pretty, I mean, it's straightforward, yet with Pisces here, it brings in a more spiritual component to that community.
Right.
So there's something about that. There's some link here between how you value yourself and how you're seen in your community. And the question is, do you feel clear? Do you have some confusion about that? Are you not sure? Or do you feel like, no, this is my way through to my spirituality? This is the group I need to be with and receive from? I mean, that's the question to ask yourself. And from that question comes your vision about how to use this new moon.
Right.
Gemini.
It makes me think, what is your community? Do you have a spiritual community that really uplifts you spiritually? If so, there's something in that that you need to lean on as you plant your seed. Or is your community a bunch of people that are drinking too much, in a state of high confusion? You won't really want to look at how your community is supporting your self-worth, or on the other end of that, how your community is supporting how you spend your money, how you use your resources. There's some link there that you want to think about. And don't worry about clarity. You're not going to find clarity right now, but get curious about it and go ahead and plant the seed for developing a new, more spiritually aware seed of your own self-worth.
Awesome. Well put.
Okay, so
right.
Then we're going to move on then to those of you who have Gemini rising. And with Gemini rising, this is a very, very personal seed that you're planting this at this new moon, because it's right there in your first house. So you're planting a seed of finding a new story, a new narrative about who you are and how you show up in the world. So that's the seed that you're planting. Get curious about it. How do people see you? And what's the link, the kind of challenging link right now between how you're seen in the world and some kind of confusion maybe about your career or your vocation or how you're seen in the larger world?
Yeah, it's really interesting with Neptune in the 10th house there. It is putting pressure on you to kind of, you're not just here as a Gemini rising person to communicate. There's a whole deeper layer to it. And Neptune's bringing that in. It's communication, but it's the communication of these other skills. I think about being able to be empathetic at work, like that Pisces kind of keyword. Like, how do you need to bring in, compassion, the recognition of how other people are suffering, and then how you can speak to that. I mean, that's sort of the pressure that's being put on you. It's like your workplace is putting some pressure on you to develop in this specific way. So those are kind of the things you want to think about. And as Laurie, as you said, like, is there confusion at work? Are you unclear about your role at work? Or do you recognize the potential for leadership you have in this way of being more empathetic and tuning into people's emotions? I mean, that's kind of what's happening. And in this moment in time, you can plant a seed for a new, or maybe not even new, but an expanded way of communication that includes these kind of softer skills and this softer vision of what the needs are of the people around you.
Yeah, think about how people in your work see you, how they experience you. Do they experience this, expansive spiritual side or creative side, or are they experiencing the more negative side, the confused side of Neptune? If you're going to a summer picnic with your workmates, don't drink. Because that could be a problem here.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, good.
I think that's a interesting one. Okay, so now we're going to move on to those of you with Cancer rising.
Yeah, with Cancer rising, this new moon is happening behind the scenes. I always think if you have Cancer rising, Gemini season kind of brings in some new information behind the scenes. Like it kind of, even though Gemini can be so light, it doesn't really have a light touch in this chart because it's bringing up subconscious patterns. So now is a moment in time at this new moon to consider that and to consider some of those patterns and to plant a seed for the way you want to think about that. Is there something new you want to learn? You know, be curious about whatever those subconscious patterns are. I mean, that's kind of what's happening. And then I think the Neptune square, what it does is it kind of puts this pressure in a sense of like, this isn't just you behind the scenes quietly doing your work. You also need to let your worldview be informed by your experience of whatever you're dealing with. I mean, there might be some suffering of your own here that has to get included, and that informs your worldview and ideally opens up the door for you to be more available and compassionate and forgiving of other people's viewpoints. So that's what the connection is here. If you feel confused about your worldview, like you're not really sure, or you just don't feel particularly empathetic towards other people's stuff, or other people's views, that's something to consider, or, maybe you see a real, I don't know, spiritual path as a teacher or some sort of, a person who can really communicate about these more difficult issues. That's
I
what I
like that
see.
you brought that up. Is there a spiritual teacher that is important for you to be paying attention to right now, or yourself as a spiritual teacher? Or is your worldview just stuck in a place of serious confusion? And when we talk about that worldview for that ninth house, that can mean so many different things. It can involve education or travel, or it can be talking about your political worldview, your religious worldview. There's so many things that might be referring to. But with the seed being planted in the 12th house, it's like whatever is confusing you or awakening you spiritually in the arena of higher understanding, that is really pushing you to get curious about what's underground in your unconscious and planting that seed to really be curious and allow that opening of your higher understanding to support that seed.
Yeah, I really like how you put that. And I'm thinking, some of those things to be cautious about are substances, but also your use of technology in this time, because there's a sensitivity here. And you want to use this time as possible to expand your horizons rather than limit yourself in more confusion, you know? So
Yeah, current day technology is so capable of creating so much confusion that I think that's a really good point, Jenny, to be aware of how you're allowing what you're allowing in to impact you on a deep level.
yeah.
So curiosity is the
Right.
name of the game. Plant the seed and allow yourself to just dream too. It doesn't have to be all serious. This could just be a time to lay on the beach and watch the waves crashing and allow yourself to go into deep 12th house understanding and curiosity in that.
I think that's a perfect use of the time. I think you nailed it, Laurie. So that it's being out in that sort of environment.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
going to really help you.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to those of you with Leo rising, and this this is speaking to the need to plant the seed in the 11th house. Now, the 11th house is it's the community that supports you, not the community that you're a leader of or that you support. You may have some leadership position in there. It's not like you can't, but ultimately, the 11th house is the community that supports you to your visions. And this is an area where, for you with Gemini in that house, it's an area that you probably think a lot about, and you probably have a lot of ideas around. So you're right now, you're gathering information and being curious about what new story might you want to tell yourself about community, what new community you want to be a part of, or what new role you want to play in a community. There could be something around that. So at any rate, that's the area you're planting the seed in. Now, the challenge comes from possibly people within that community that are bringing in either a deep confusion to you. From this is the confusion, the challenge is coming from the 8th house, which is other people's baggage, other people's stuff. In this case, you may not know how to navigate someone else's baggage that is impacting the seed you're trying to plant in community. Using that to really develop a deep compassion for people who struggle with different things than you do. This is really a need to develop compassion for others in order to create the community you want.
Yeah, this kind of, for me, that it is a great connection between these two, because it's almost as if, you have this idea for this community vision, however, you must really understand, like, whatever that community vision is, that it really needs to really work for the people that need it. Like, so let's say you're trying to create a community vision around helping the homeless, for example. And it's like, it's what you would need to do is really have an understanding of, like, what do those people need the most, and being able to work with that, not just assuming and sort of cutting to the chase and doing a very intellectual Gemini move, but to really bring in, what are the people who are suffering, what do they need in this whatever this community vision is. So that's an example, but think about how those things work together in your own life. Like, this really, it's almost like where the rubber meets the road. Like, how do you care for the suffering of other people? How do you cope with it? How do you work with it? How do you accept it? And then, how is that impacting the way that you want to think in your community, or the way you're communicating?
Well, I really like that. It's such a natural connection, really.
It really is.
Between these two. Yeah, I like that. That's really good. So don't worry about clarity. Just consider these things and spend some time dreaming about it, getting curious about what the seed is, and moving forward. Now we're going to move on to those of you with Virgo rising. What do you see in this one, Jennie?
Well, that Gemini seed is right there in your career, your profession, the way you show up in public. So then the seed that you're planting, not for clarity, but for a vision, has to do with your career, something to do with the way you communicate in your career. And in the moment that you're sort of very focused on your career space, what's happening is that Neptune is placing some pressure on you, or on that Gemini new moon. And what that pressure is about is something to do with your ability to work with the feelings, sensitivity, suffering of those you're in intimate relationships with. So there's a correlation here. Like, you might think, oh, I'm going to do this with my career, and you're in this very intellectual space. But there's some information coming in from this other place where you just need to be more open to other people's struggles. And you might feel really confused. You might feel pulled by a partnership you're in, and it's impacting your relationship in a way that you're like, wait a minute. Or you might recognize that whatever you're working with in that relationship is actually helping you see something more clearly in your career, or more compassionately is the right word, not clearly. But there's a connection between those two things. And that's really the question that's being put before you at this time, is how well you're working with that.
So the seed that you're planting in your career needs to take into consideration the spiritual awareness of another person
Mm.
or a relationship. Does that sound right?
Yes, that's a good summary. Yep,
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
so.
So don't let, if you're in this place and you're planting a seed, you're starting something new or you're considering starting something new in your career, if there is a relationship in your life that is really confusing to you,
Mhm.
flip that on its head a little bit and just using that understanding that confusion is the other side of awareness.
Mm.
It's two sides to the
Mhm.
same coin. It's like we talked about in the middle, the ladder that goes from confusion all the way up into high spiritual understanding. It's
Mhm.
underneath that confusion that awareness opens. So allowing yourself, again, go out, lay down, look at the leaves blowing on the trees or listen to the surf and allow yourself to just open to beyond that confusion and into the awareness and be curious about how that awareness, how that spirituality is going to support the seed that's planted.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I like how you were saying that just about going out and being okay with not having clarity about it, because I think that that's the thing that could happen here is you could feel a lot of tension between your relationship and your career. And really, it's just, just let that roll off your back and go and just divert by doing something very enjoyable, like just being out in nature, because that's the thing that's going to let you relax. And that's what you need to do here in order to relieve the confusion. So it all works together.
That's
Nice.
absolutely that's absolutely perfect, I would say. Okay, so
Great.
now we're going to move on to those of you with Libra rising. Now, the seed that you're planting, if you have Libra rising, is in the ninth house. So, the ninth house it's a big area. I always think the ninth, well, it is. It's a big area. It is the ninth house is about where we expand our understanding of the world. And it can involve everything from education to travel to politics and religion. And just it's all these areas where we expand our understanding of the world. It is overall, it is your worldview. So
Mm.
you really at this point in time there's curiosity about that worldview and maybe a curiosity about what direction to what's a new story you want to plant here. Do you want to travel? Do you want to study something new? Do you want to understand more about something that is really expanding your understanding of the world? Other cultural understandings are also involved in this house. So that's where your curiosity is, where you're planting a seed, where you want to understand and start a new story. Now, the challenge from Neptune is coming from the sixth house. So there's something in the realm of your day-to-day routines, your how you care for your health. There's something there that may be really asking for you to pay attention to your spiritual understanding or a certain level of
Mhm.
confusion around how you care for yourself or your routines of your life. There's some
Mm.
confusion there that is impacting the storyline that you're beginning or
Mm.
that you're being curious about.
Yeah, as you're talking, it's like I'm almost thinking about the challenge that's being issued is like, how do you take those experiences, which are these ninth house experiences of developing wisdom, and immediately sort of start applying them and incorporating them in your own daily practices? So they're not these lofty ideas that are out there. There's something that you immediately apply to your own suffering or to your own things that you need to do. It's kind of like, going and studying with this new
Hmm.
like meditation teacher, And so what do? You start meditating every day, because that's the instruction you're receiving, and you need to apply it right away. So it's that kind of, like, I think the sixth house is so, it's much more like practically oriented and really like, hey, habits, routines. And it's asking you to bring that wisdom into that right away. And sort of, it's like you're your own test subject, applying it to yourself right away. And that's what I think the challenge is about. And it might be, as we're using the symbol of Neptune to describe, there could be a credible amount of confusion of like, I don't really know what I'm doing. If you're in a difficult place in your life, and that's one way. Another way might be like, no, I have a really clear image of what this is. Either way, you are going to work with that vision, and the way to work with it is to release any attachment to the need for it to be crystal clear. Let it be soft, enjoy things, expand to the wisdom of nature all around you. I mean, this is, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, wonderful time to get outside and really just be there. Not even necessarily being active, but just being outside, immersing yourself in the wisdom of nature is a wonderful use of this.
Yeah, with Neptune in that sixth house of the day-to-day routine, allowing yourself to just really dream as part of your day-to-day routines may be really important in developing this curiosity of this seed to plant. Neptune in that sixth house could, this could be referring to, time you spend on a meditation cushion, or time you spend outdoors on a routine basis, or it could also refer to issues that you're having to deal with around your body, around your health, that may cause suffering, but may ultimately open the door to deep spiritual understanding. There's something in those two places that are really developing, really pushing on the need to plant this seed. It's really fascinating. I like that connection.
I know, and it's such a learning. Both those houses are to do with your learning and how you work with that learning. And the other just thing that popped in my mind was just the write down your dreams. This might be a time when your dreams are informing you. So not only are you creating a dream, but you're also like, what are your dreams telling you? This is a good position for that too. So
Absolutely. Yeah. Make that part of your daily routines, that sixth house. Something. Okay. We're going to go on now to those of you with Scorpio rising.
Nice. All right. Well, I guess with Scorpio rising, your seed, this Gemini new moon is in the eighth house. That eighth house, it's always a little bit of a tricky one to understand. It's somewhat of a mysterious place, but it's the one that has to do with other people's values, other people's intense emotions, other people's money, resources, all those as hot topics, and the way you sort of deal with those things that come at you, like how you set boundaries, how you work with other people when they're coming at you with these challenges. And so it's a fairly sensitive place. But as Scorpio rising, like, you really have a unique ability here to really work with, to gather information from this area, and receive it and then pass it on to someone else. So you're planting a seed to do with those topics, like how you work with other people's issues, how you talk about it, what you learn from it. And at the same time, there's this pressure coming from Neptune, the Neptune square. And Neptune in Pisces is in your fifth house of creativity and the way you give love. So there's really this interplay around giving of yourself. As you're working with other people's intense things in that Gemini place, there's also this like sub layer of like, are you able to see and recognize the suffering that's going along with that, for those people. So and the way that you give of yourself is so important, because that fifth house is the giving of love. So there's this real dance here between those two things. And if you feel confused about when other people are coming at you and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can love that person, like, whoa, this is a chance to kind of step back and soften and see what that is, or maybe you're at the other end where you do sort of go, yeah, this is my spiritual path. My creative pursuits have to do with me reckoning with the suffering of other people, and allows me to help love whatever's coming my way with that. So this is a pretty deep topic, I think, with the Scorpio rising.
Yeah, it really is. I like that. It's really interesting thinking about that connection. And the only other thing I wanted to add around that eighth house is it also, in different individuals, it's going to show up in different ways, but it can also have to do with, other people's money, other people's finances, and shared resources as well. And as that confusion or the awareness of how you give love in the face of shared resources as well. I'm not sure. There was something I was trying to grasp there that's kind of slippery, as Neptune can be. But there is, this need to understand how you are giving of love in a spiritually open manner. This can bring in a lot of confusion if you're not able to touch into that spiritual awareness. It can bring in an awfully lot of confusion of, how these things are working out, how you're managing yourself in the face of shared resources. I think of, when I think of shared resources in this way, you can also think of that eighth house as, it can bring in things around inheritance. And you can see how confusing and difficult this could be if you're not in healthy relationship of being able to love people that you're challenged in that way of, I don't know, I'm just thinking about families and inheritance and how much complication can come in there.
Oh, and how much fighting and things become revealed that you never expected, like this sibling that you thought you were good with suddenly. I know exactly.
Right. Yeah, so there's something in that, you're telling yourself a new story about how you share resources with other people, or how you navigate other people's resources. And what is necessary is that ability to go in deep and give love from a deep inner soft place, rather than the confusion.
So definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think what I want to add in here is just like the eighth house is a place where you can become very triggered. I mean, even though it's a place that is above the horizon and therefore relates more with the outside world, nonetheless, it can be extremely triggering on a personal level when you start going into those. And I think that is where you have to go into this place of unconditional love, like for others, and also for yourself. I mean, that's what you're making me think of when you're talking about that. Like, absolutely. It's messy. It can be messy.
Yeah, it can definitely be messy. It's an interesting one for sure. Okay. I think we covered that. Let's go on to those of you who have Sagittarius rising. So with Sagittarius rising, the seed that you're planting is in personal, intimate partnership. This can be, your spousal type relationship, your romantic type relationship. It can also be a work partnership, any kind of one-on-one, mostly equal based partnership. That's what the seventh house is about. So you're getting curious, you're playing with ideas of how to plant a new seed here. What's the curiosity? What is it that can be made new in this partnership that you have or that you're developing? So that's where the curiosity is coming in. That's where the seed is. Now, the challenge to this is coming from the fourth house, from your home. So there's some way in which something a little confusing from the area of home. And this could come out in many different ways. It could be other family members that don't approve of your relationship, or it could be, do I want to live with this partner, or do I want to maintain my separate home? There could be issues around that are being worked out. Now, you're not going to come to any conclusion here. You're just going to Go outside, listen to the birds sing, listen to the ocean waves, and dream about it. Plant a seed that will become clear over time, but really considering what is in that fourth house, that deep internal level of home, family, ancestral line, your own deepest inner self. What is a little bit confusing that is impacting the relationship? Yeah, say more, Jennie.
Say something.
Say more, Jennie.
Well, I think it's interesting because right off the bat, talking about the seventh and the fourth house, seventh partnerships, fourth home. I mean, you can see right away how they can get all glommed together in one way. If you're dealing with your marriage, your intimate partner, it's very much tied into your home life. Not to mention if you have children and you've got that in the mix, there's this thing going on between family and partnership. And how do you work with both? How do you, remain in the partnership and support one another and have it be that way while you're also in this family space, and it just seems like no matter what, it warrants a lot of kindness and compassion towards the roots, the family space, looking at that as the foundation and rather than thinking of it as something solid, like tangible, made out of earth, it's more like made out of compassion and kindness and forgiveness for each other, for each other's foibles, for each other. Maybe there's a time when your partner drives you nuts because they handle the kids in a different way and you don't like it, so just letting the softer bit kind of be your base, let compassion and understanding be your base. And then you can have these more kind of, I don't know, sort of Gemini conversations about how you want to divvy up tasks and so on in your partnership. It's an interesting juxtaposition between the two. But as you're saying, Laurie, you don't have to have the answers. What you do need to do is commit to going outside. And I just like your whole analogy of like, let's go lie on the beach and just listen to the waves. It is so nourishing. And we underestimate that. And it can be so powerful in this time of just working in that kind of mix.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. So yeah, looking at your home, what is the connection between home and partnership? Okay, we'll leave it at that before I run down another rabbit hole.
Yes. Or
okay. I do. So now for those of you with Capricorn rising.
Yeah, so with Capricorn rising, this new moon is falling in your sixth house. So this is your intellectual way of doing things that regards your routines. Maybe this is a writing practice or something. That's what I immediately think of as I'm a writer. But anyway, you want to plant that seed for a new idea to do with your routines, your habits, the way you look after yourself. And at the meantime, there's a challenge being issued from Neptune. Neptune brings in, as we talked about earlier on in the video, that sort of ladder of like where it can be really confusing and uncertain and there's nothing clear about it, or it can really help you understand what spiritual path you need to work with. And both of those are happening in your third house of communication. I think of the third house as being like your logistics, how you like go to the store and, you talk to the cashier and you go to the post office and then maybe you do pick up the phone and talk to your sibling later too, because that's like a daily kind of thing. So there's some sort of challenge being issued from those areas of life, something that isn't clear. Maybe it's something that you need to communicate and you don't know how you're going to say it or what you're going to say, and there's something about that. And it's okay. I mean, the thing to do here is to accept that you might not have a clue about how to work with these two areas of life, like how you communicate and what your routines are. But the assured thing is to just be kinder, gentler to yourself. We've been talking a lot about going out into nature and just softening and relaxing and not having to be crystal clear about whatever the next step is. So there's something about all those things.
For some reason, as I'm looking at this and listening to you talking, I'm just thinking about, this is just silly, but I'm just thinking about, you go and you get in your car and you're going to go to the grocery store to pick up stuff that you need. But you kind of get lost in your thinking and you end up just driving somewhere different and doing something totally out of the ordinary. Your daily routines get changed, and it kind of opens up a different pathway. I'm not sure where that is coming from, but I just think that with
Mhm.
this particular setup, it's like you're planting a seed for setting up new routines. Well, but there's no clarity in it. Your mind is just kind of floating. So allow your mind to flow. Allow yourself to, rather than going to do the tasks of the day, just go for a drive. Stop
Mm,
somewhere beautiful, watch the birds flying around, or
yeah.
listen to the ocean waves, and just allow yourself to let go in order to allow your mind to bring in the curiosity. And ultimately, the seed you're planting is not going to be clear. It's going to be a little fuzzy. It's sort of, I think about when you plant your garden, and I don't know if people do this, but when I was a kid, every time we would plant a row of seeds, at the end we'd put a stick in with the seed packet on it that had the picture of the plants that were going to grow in that row. It's like you don't have clarity of what that seed packet is, but you're still planting the seed. You might not know what the seed really is. I think I've gone off on a little tangent, but at any rate, don't worry about the clarity. Don't worry about the picture on the seed packet. Plant the seed and trust that it's bringing a new direction.
Yeah, I mean, as you're, I don't think you went too off tangent. I think it sort of suits the mood of this whole thing. And also you're just reminding me of, like, when you go to the grocery store, or even when you're driving, as you mentioned, I think driving is an important thing to bring in here because we do it so much, for the most part. But there's these little kernels of wonderful, nourishing bits of information that come at you. Maybe you hear about a podcast that you want to listen to, or a book you want to read, or some way that those day-to-day interactions like open the door to a whole new practice. And I think that's what you were saying, and it's
Yes.
what made, it got me to that kind of. Either way, you're either driving around and you learn, something new comes to light, you incorporate it into your routines, or your routines get totally upended because you're confused. And I mean, either way, it's like just being in the kind of softer space of like opening to
Yeah.
whatever experience happens to come your way, you know?
It's
So
definitely an interesting new moon. It's really interesting to be planting a seed without clarity and trusting that it's going
Mhm.
to open in just how it needs to. Okay, so now we're going to move on to those of you with Aquarius rising. So this is planting the seed. For those of you with Aquarius rising, you're planting a seed in the fifth house. The fifth house is the area of creativity. It's the area where we give of ourselves most authentically. The old time astrologers talked about it as the house of children, love affairs, creativity. It's where we give love. So you're planting a seed of how to give of yourself.
Mm.
That's a lovely seed to plant. And in Gemini, you're thinking in terms of gathering information. How could it look? How can I give of myself, either through creativity or just through my heart? How am I giving love? So gathering the information of how that can be done in a new or different way, being curious about that. And the challenge is coming from the second house. You can think of the, whoa, that was weird. Excuse me. So the challenge is coming from the second house, which is really, your own self-worth.
Mm.
Maybe there's a question within you of your own worthiness to be the creative person that you really want to be. Or maybe there's the other thing of the second house is, it's your self-worth. It's also money and resources. Maybe there's some way that you feel insecure, that you don't have the resources to plant the seed that you really want to plant. And, that's the kind of the confusion part of Neptune. So you want to think about your own self-worth coming from a place of spiritual understanding and really bringing that part of yourself to your creativity or your giving of love.
Yeah, and the topics you're bringing up, it's bringing up a few things for me. One is that fifth house also very much has to do with risk taking, when you're willing to take a risk. And so there's something about the willingness to take an intellectual leap, or to speak about something that you haven't done before, something that feels like, oh, a little bit risky, or you're trying to change your communication style as the way that you're giving love is like literally how you speak to people in a different manner. So that's one thing, just that risk-taking component. And maybe some of the confusion is you don't know which risk to take. Like, what are the right risks to take? When are you being foolish and when are you being brave? That's sort of what that fifth house can kind of bring in. And that the question about that is exactly as you say, Laurie, it's because of the confusion about self-worth, like you might feel like I need to do this to feel better about myself, and that might be a positive thing or it might not, and you have to kind of evaluate those things, and part of this is trusting. I always think of the Pisces stuff as this trusting your gut, like trusting your intuition, which we're not always encouraged to develop that intuitive part. So there's something in there about risk taking, and then also the other piece that is so powerful is self-love, which the second house ultimately brings into the mix, like the having to really, when you're dealing with self-worth, it's about how do you love yourself. It's a spiritual practice. And if you read any spiritual book, at least that I've ever read, it's the hardest pursuit. It's the hardest thing to really do that. So there's a lot. This is a very rich little component, set of components for you with Aquarius rising, like bringing in these topics of love and self-love, and being willing to take a risk for love and not being tied to knowing exactly what that is, but trusting that you will know when the time
I
comes.
love that you said that. Just taking a risk for love. That is so much what this is for those of you with Aquarius rising. It is, really knowing your own spiritual center and being willing to utilize that in taking a risk for giving of yourself. That's beautiful. Okay.
Nice.
So now I think we are ready to move on to those of you with Pisces rising.
Oh, yeah. So Pisces rising, this Gemini new moon is falling in your fourth house of family, ancestry. I've lately been thinking about it as land, like having this connection to the land you live on or a land you like to visit. So there's something about those topics at this Gemini new moon that you're planting a seed for. And again, we're talking about this like, with Gemini, you might think, oh, I want to plant a seed for clarity. Well, no, there's too much confusion and fuzziness around this one. So it's a little bit more of like, what is your vision? What is your vision for your home? What is your envision? How do you envision connecting with land, if that's the topic that caught your attention? Or how do you envision connecting with your lineage? That's a bigger topic. It depends on what's going on in your life, but that's the seed that you're planting. At the same time, there's this interesting pressure coming from Neptune over in your first house. There might be a lot of confusion about your self-development. There might be some confusion about who am I? What is my identity? What is my purpose? Why am I here? I mean, these are big questions that can certainly come about when Neptune is in your first house, So there's some kind of pressure being put on about that, like, and maybe that is the connection. Like maybe there's a confusion about your lineage. Right. And this is a time when some of that is starting to emerge or you're not quite sure. And also, as you work with this, you are identifying for yourself, what is a way to work with this on a spiritual level? It might mean that you need to have more compassion for yourself or more forgiveness of yourself of something you feel like you've done or something like that. I mean, those are the topics that are coming in here, and it very much has to do with your roots, your grounding.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about that kind of confusion of who you are in some way impacting your family, your home life.
Mhm.
You can see that, and it could be that your spiritual understanding of yourself is a bit of a trigger around your home or your family,
Mm, mhm.
or your other Neptunian issues. There's lots of ways that could go.
Yeah.
But if you're a relatively healthy, developed person, then Neptune moving through your first house for quite a few years now, you've been really learning about yourself on a very spiritual level.
Mm,
And bringing that into, at this moment, the seed that you're planting for a new story, a new idea, a new dream about how you bring your family or your home forward.
mm, mhm.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
might,
it's
yeah,
mm.
that's an interesting one.
Yeah, very much about house think I mean, the first and the fourth are both what I consider sort of identity houses, and that's it. Like the first is you, and then the fourth is, where do you come from? Both your family, your origin, the place, the country, all of those things. So those are all of potential topics for whoever's listening to this. Like just think about which one of those, what is it that's come up for you right now? And I as a Pisces rising person too, that definitely suggests quite a bit of sensitivity as you are in interface with everything else around you. So there is a need for, um, I don't know, working with that, like nourishing yourself, making sure you're uh, helping yourself to some degree, so that you can be there for your family. I mean, that's really what some of this is about too. So
Yeah. You might
yeah,
be finding a whole new family that you're
all right.
connected with. And it's an interesting one to consider. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of our conversation.
Indeed, it does.
I think it does. And
Yeah.
thank you, Jenny. I hope that you and everyone else out there has a wonderful new moon, plants that seed, and just has some daydreams around it. Go outside, listen to the
Yes.
birds, listen to the all the beauty of nature.
Yeah, nature has a lot to offer. So thank you, Lori, and thank you everybody for watching.
Okay, ta ta.